Good morning, everybody. Corey Used Bloody History. So, today, I'm going to hope to get to more of Armstrong's work on Harvey and Lee in the Marines, but we're going to talk about the research that I've been doing lately because I've come to a few new revelations, and so we're going to talk about that first. So, of course, the entire idea for me lately has been to confirm or deny, find evidence for or against Armstrong's Harvey and Lee hypothesis, which I can tell you at this point is not a hypothesis. I believe this is absolutely 100% true. Now, what is my basis for believing this? And well, it's obvious because the evidence points in that direction. So I've gone out and I've found a bunch of incredible documents reference the Office of Naval Intelligence, some things that I've never seen or heard before, and some of that has to do with Jack Martin, and we'll get to that another time. Some to do with Guy Bannister. Some to do with the homosexuals who were surrounding, allegedly, Oswald at the time when he meets with Dean Andrews to get his Marine discharge fixed. I think I'm coming to understand the story of Oswald wanting to fix his discharge. I think it blindsided him because he was doing exactly what he was told to do. And the Marines were like, dishonorable. And he's like, what? I think he should have gotten the hint at that point that they were going to start to hang him out to dry. So, in regards to evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, of a Harvey Oswald, I have found a ton of documents, official documents, that reference Harvey Lee Oswald. And I've clipped some of them. There's a whole lot more than this. And it seems to be a pattern of the name Harvey Lee Oswald popping up. Right? So before I read these statements, let me just go ahead and jump to a page from the book by Peter Dale Scott, because I think this will kind of sum it up, and then I'll go through a couple of these examples, all right? It says here, this personnel file appears to be a compilation, whether from before or after the assassination is not clear. It collects copies of correspondence on Oswald from the files of at least 3 and probably more Marine commanders under which he served. As published as Folsom Exhibit Number 1, and we've talked about Folsom Exhibit Number 1, I've already read some examples from it in the past, this personnel file contains only unclassified documents and information. There are no overt references to Marine G2, and only one passing reference to the existence of confidential intelligence records on Oswald in the Department of the Navy. This reference is in a letter of 29th of July, 1960, recommending Oswald's discharge from the Marines. The letter mentions 2 confidential reports from the 8th New Orleans and 9th Chicago Naval District Intelligence Offices, which it cites the following: DIO 9th ND Confidential Report Serial 02049-E of 8 June 60. DIO 9th ND Confidential Report Serial 02296-E of 27 June 60. Years later, replying affirmatively to a request for these DIO reports from researcher Paul Hoke, the Naval Investigative Service, successor to the ONI, supplied 2 records. These established a fact not available from the rest of the personnel file, that Marine G2, in regional offices as well as at Marine headquarters, received documentary information from this ONI district office concerning Oswald. In addition, at least one of these G2 records listed Oswald by a slightly different name. This alternative name, which eventually was used by at least 4 different military intelligence sources, was Harvey Lee Oswald. This Harvey Lee Oswald reference is no accidental anomaly, but part of an organized pattern, widely dispersed, that suggests an official intelligence deception and possible dual filing system. Serial 02296-E of 27 June 60 is the earliest Harvey Lee Oswald reference we now possess over 24 from the files of ONI, FBI, CIA, Army Intelligence, the Secret Service, the Mexican Secret Police, and the Dallas Police. A consistent pattern of behavior in these agencies since the assassination has been the tendency to suppress references to Harvey Lee Oswald and replace them by the more standard Lee Harvey Oswald. Ladies and gentlemen, this might be one of the more important statements ever made on the Kennedy assassination. This is a revelation that, in looking at these documents, not only some of the official documents, but from statements of Oswald's family, particularly his aunt by marriage, Hazel Oswald, which we'll get to. So it appears this is the fucking reality. Everybody fucking knew there were two of them. Every goddamn agency knew there were two of them. That's why there's two files. See, he refers to it here as a possible dual filing system. No, they knew there were two. That's why there were two fucking files at all these different agencies. It hit me like a ton of bricks today, just in going through this stuff, because I only found some of this stuff from ONI last night. Some of the ONI stuff, like they have a whole report on Jack Martin was suspected of being involved in the assassination. And they give a whole backstory to Jack Martin and list family members and stuff. But guess what? Jack Martin, that we know, is supposed to be Edward Suggs, isn't it? And also there's evidence that Jack Martin was Jean-Pierre Lafitte. So who the fuck was Jack Martin really? Does anybody know? Was he a different person at different times? This is more examples of this fucking body double identity transfer CIA technique. We know that Jean-Pierre Lafitte went by Jean Martin when he was working at the Pimpsall or the Plimsoll Club. But also I saw references that they'd call him Jack. So Jack Martin worked at the Plimsoll Club, right? So you see what I'm saying? These motherfuckers can't help themselves. This is nothing new. The only thing new here is that these dots are being connected. Here's the deal. Like the fucking documents they're withholding in the Kennedy assassination, I don't think have to do with the fucking assassination at all. I think it has to do with all of this stuff. The dual Oswalds and any other programs they might have had. All right, so where do I begin? Here we go. This is just a random scattering of documents that I clipped. There's a fucking ton more. November 30th, 63. This is an FBI document from SAC New Orleans. Assassination of President Kennedy. Reference New Orleans till November 28 instant, 11 a.m. Following is a summary of general investigation by New Orleans office November 29. Separate teletypes have been sent. Bureau in Dallas, specific investigation as a result of specific leads. M. Mazza, office manager, J.R. Michaels, Inc., Freight Forwarding Company, 442 Canal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, advised November 29 instant that Lee Harvey Oswald was employed as an office boy for his company approximately 2 weeks beginning January 17, 1956. None of present employees recall Oswald. Next heading is Travel of Harvey Lee Oswald. And here's the thing to note. It's got the circle. Okay, so remember we discussed the circle between names. And I believed it meant that a name was missing. And then I got an email from a gentleman who was familiar with this. And he said that it was referencing that this name had been referenced in other documents, which might be true in some way. But here, the only thing I'm pointing out is that they made a notation on the name, but they didn't correct the Lee and the Harvey. They left it Harvey Lee while making a notation right above it. So that doesn't make much sense, does it? Interviews with ticket agents. Southern Greyhound Bus Lines, New Orleans, failed to identify any of these ticket agents issuing a ticket to Lee Harvey Oswald For transportation to Mexico City during September 63, 2 ticket agents will not be available until November 30th, 63 and December 1, 63, respectively. Recontact with manager Continental Trailways, but bus system New Orleans revealed that 2 ticket agents not previously contacted sold 1 ticket each for bus passage between New Orleans and Brownsville, Texas, September 6 and 10, 63. Miscellaneous. Brian Ampulse contacted New Orleans police and advised had information concerning Harvey Lee Oswald. Brian Ampulse, Metairie, Louisiana, advised November 29, 63, he had conversation with Lee Harvey Oswald, who was passing out literature on Canal Street. Hang on a second. All right. Hang on a second. So this is something else that I've noticed in going over all of the Harvey Lee documents, which we're going to all cover today. But I'll see them within a paragraph or two jump back and forth between Harvey Lee Oswald and then Lee Harvey Oswald, right? They can't be making a mistake. That can't be a mistake that they're doing multiple times and then correcting multiple times in there, right? They wouldn't have it wrong in there twice and then correct in there twice if that wasn't intentional. That jumps off the page now. Now that the realization that everybody fucking knew. Brian Ampulse, Metairie, Louisiana, advised November 29, 63, he had a conversation with Lee Harvey Oswald, who was passing out literature on Canal Street in the summer of 63, a day or two before Oswald was arrested by New Orleans Police Department. Has had no contact with Oswald since that time and knows of no associates of Oswald. Ampulse stated during conversation Oswald protested U.S. blockade of Cuba in late 1962. Ampulse stated he recalls no further details regarding Oswald's views. Ampulse said he generally agreed with Oswald, but that Oswald gave him the impression of being a member of the, quote, fanatic fringe. He defined fanatic fringe as those persons who lose sight of their goals because their thinking becomes warped by hatred. All right. So, next document is the roster of employees from the files of the Texas School Book Depository. And it has Harvey Lee Oswald and an address of 605 Elspeth, spelt wrong. But Oswald never gave them that address. He never gave them the 1026 address. He only gave them Ruth Payne's address on 5th in Fort Worth. But somehow the name Harvey Lee Oswald, 605 Elspeth, is on the documentation at School Book Depository. Makes a little more sense now because they knew, and that was how they referenced it. And I think when they're referencing Harvey Lee Oswald and then Lee Harvey Oswald in the same document, they're internally signaling. They're signaling to other people who are in the know, hey, this is about Harvey. And then they can say, then they can't keep saying it repeatedly, but they'll say it enough times so that the other officers or agents reading the document know who the fuck they're talking about, right? It's a differentiation system. But yes, Harvey Lee Oswald at 605 Elspeth on the documentation from the Texas School Book Depository. Either that or this is another fake document, in which case they backdated shit and they fucked up once again. Okay, then we have a document dated the 5th of April, 1972. It's a handwritten document, and this document is actually referenced in Peter Dell Scott's work and a number of other places. So it says, subject, memorandum for the record, Harvey Lee Oswald. 1, today the DCCI staff advised that the director had relayed via the DDP the injunction that the agency was not under any circumstances to, make inquiries or ask questions of any source or defector about Oswald. Today, the DCI staff advised we read the director had relayed via the DDP the injunction that the agency was not under any circumstances to make inquiries or ask questions of any source or defector about Oswald. 2, I will arrange to have the questions about Oswald sent to SBCI for use with the, and then it goes to the next page, which I didn't clip because it only had 1 or 2 words on it. So But that's pretty interesting, huh? Director Covert Intelligence, is that what that is? The next page, synopsis, Billy Joe Lord, U.S. Air Force number, and it says, has his number, presently stationed at Bergstrom Air Force Base in Texas. Lord's been interviewed by the FBI. Billy Joe Lord was on the boat to overseas to, London, I think it landed, with Oswald. So I'm going to skip down to the last paragraph here. She added the short, she's talking about Vada Sykes, Selective Service employee, being interviewed about Billy Joe Lord. She added that shortly after the assassination of President Kennedy, Mrs. Lord came into her office and exhibited a letter she had received from her son. To her recollection, Billy Joe Lord stated in his letter that he had been a cabin mate of Harvey Lee Oswald when he had traveled to France by boat. Mrs. Sykes stated Billy Joe Lord was worried about any implication and had gone to his commanding officer with the story. Mrs. Lord was also worried and told Mrs. Sykes that she didn't know what to do. So, yeah, he's in the Air Force and then he ends up on the boat with Oswald. You know something? I'm going to have to see if I can't get the training records of Billy Joe Lord. Next document, marked very urgent. From Legat Byrne, changed. Lee Harvey Oswald, a.k.a. Harvey Lee Oswald. Internal Security, R. Cuba. Remember, any document you see that says IS-R Cuba means Internal Security, Restricted Cuba. Title changed to show corrected sequence of first and middle names. I bet. All right. Then we have another paragraph I clipped, I believe, from Peter Dale Scott's book. The review board also sought to determine whether the FBI maintained a file in Mexico City on a Harvey Lee Oswald. I think we discussed this when we covered Mexico City a while back. Under the file number 105-2137, the Mexico City legal attaché opened a file on Lee Harvey Oswald in October 1963 following Oswald's visit to Mexico City. Some of the documents in the Legat file contain notations for routing records to a file numbered 105-2137 and were captioned Harvey Lee Oswald. One researcher conjectured that this file would predate the Lee Harvey Oswald file, 105-3702, and might lead the review board to other FBI documents on Lee Harvey Oswald. In response to the review board's request, the FBI searched its Legat's files for the file numbered 105-2137 and captioned Harvey Lee Oswald, but it did not find such a file, I bet. All right, next one. This is from the local. This is a translation of a Russian document. Citizen Harvey Lee Oswald was hired as a regulator in the experimental shop of the plant on January 13, 1960. During his employment as a regulator, his performance was unsatisfactory. He does not display the initiative for increasing his skill as a regulator. Citizen Lee Harvey Oswald reacts in an oversensitive manner to remarks from the foreman and is careless in his work. Citizen L.H. Oswald takes no part in the social life of the shop and keeps very much to himself. This report is issued for presentation to the Minsk City Militia Department. Plant Director D. Yudelovich. So, here we have to ask, again, here we see both. We see Harvey Lee Oswald, and then we see Citizen Lee Harvey Oswald. And no time does anyone make any efforts to correct it, and there's no notations on whether it should be corrected. So, was that exactly what it said from the Russian document, or was that switched as an indicator to other people in the know to know which one they were talking about? I'm starting to lean in the direction of the latter. All right. So next is a clip from an interview with Elrod. I forgot what the fucking guy's name. I clipped it from here. John Elrod. He stated on several occasions he's had difficulty remembering due to his extreme use of alcohol. He knew nothing concerning the assassination of the president, knew nothing about Jack Ruby and the killing of Harvey Lee Oswald, or of any information concerning the possibility of the receipt of money by Jack Ruby except hearsay, information that he'd received from his unknown cellmate. Elrod is described as a white male, November 1232, Bassett, Arkansas, 5'11", 180. All right. Next is a interview by David Bellin, Warren Commission, Commission's Exhibit 985, asking Lieutenant Day of the Identification Bureau, Dallas Police, about evidence in this case, and starts off, these are prints or pictures, I should say, of the traces of the prints of the side of the magazine housing of the gun, that's a lot of ofs, number C-2766. Mr. Bellin, were those prints in such condition as to be identifiable, if you know? No, sir, I could not make a positive identification of these prints. Did you have enough opportunity to work and get pictures or not? I worked with them, yes. I could not exclude all possibility as to identification. I thought I knew which they were, but I could not positively identify them. What was your opinion so far as it went as to whose they were? They appeared to be the right middle and right ring finger of Harvey Lee Oswald, and then there's a comma, and then Lee Harvey Oswald. Why he said both with Harvey Lee Oswald first, who knows? Next, we have an article which highlights the fact that Captain Will Fritz first announced to the news the subject arrested is Harvey Lee Oswald. Suspect arrested for cop killing. Within an hour after the assassination, police charged a 24-year-old man with the murder of a Dallas policeman. Homicide Captain Will Fritz said last night witnesses had identified the man as the slayer of the policeman. He's Harvey Lee Oswald of Fort Worth. He denied that he had shot anybody. Fritz said it had not been established that the man killed the president, but it had been established that he was in the building from which the shots were fired, etc., etc. All right, next we have a check of banks, New Orleans. And this is from FBI. No records found of checking savings or loan accounts or safe deposit boxes in banks in New Orleans in the area in the name of Harvey Lee Oswald. Interesting. No records found for Oswald. It says it again for Harvey Lee Oswald. Second time. I didn't even catch that the first time. At Louisiana Department of Revenue. Can't read that. No motor vehicles. New Orleans Retail Credit Bureau. New Orleans Police Department. This part is scratched out. I'm trying to read through it. Under the name O.H. Lee with negative results. There was no O.H. Lee because there is no O.H. Lee because O.H. Lee was Herbert Leon Lee who stayed in room O and they transferred his fucking documents. It was so easy. All right, next one. FBI dated 11/26/63. Assassination President Kennedy, November 22/63. Dallas, Texas, New Orleans. Following investigation conducted by New Orleans office today, associates of Harvey Lee Oswald. Next comes to the testimony of Michael Hardin. And Michael Hardin, who might he be? He worked for the O'Neill Funeral Home. And Mr. Hubert is the lawyer for the Warren Commission doing the questioning. And one of the sentences here says, I state to you now that the general nature of the Commission's inquiry to ascertain, evaluate, and report upon the facts relating to the assassination of President Kennedy and subsequent violent death of Harvey Lee Oswald. In particular, to you, Mr. Hardin, the nature of our inquiry today is to determine the facts you know about the death of Oswald and any other pertinent facts you may know about the general inquiry, including the ambulance call and the documents relative to the O'Neill Funeral Home. So here we are in 1964, March 31st. This has been going on for a year or 6 months or 8 months, and they know who the hell Lee Harvey Oswald is, right? But the name Harvey Lee Oswald keeps popping up in these official documents. Here is another incident which is kind of interesting. This is Mr. Ball, Joseph, was his first name Joseph, I believe, talking to Earlene Roberts. And she's discussing when the cops came to the house. And Mr. Ball says, and the police officers came out there. Yes, sir. Do you remember what they said? Well, it was Will Fritz's men. It was plainclothes men. And I was at the back doing something, and Mr. Johnson answered the door, and they identified themselves, and then he called me. What did they say? Well, they asked him if there was a Harvey Lee Oswald there. What did he say? He says, I don't know. I'd have to call the housekeeper. And he called me, and I went in the books, and I said, no, there's no one here by that name. Then they end up talking about, he asks, and you didn't have that name? You didn't even know his name was Lee Oswald? No, he registered as O.H. Lee, and they were asking for Harvey Lee Oswald. So she reemphasizes the fact that they were specifically looking for Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald. You know, and God, I think everyone in the world just passes off these Harvey Lee Oswald references as mistakes. I don't think they're mistakes anymore. Not seeing the way the evidence has laid itself out as it has. I'm working my way through the military records. And I'm starting to figure some things out, okay? So go look at the picture of Lee Harvey Oswald in the Philippines. There's only one of them. I never knew this picture existed. It's in my presentation. I'm going to do something with that here soon. But go find the picture of Oswald in the Philippines. And then go look at the picture of Oswald graduating in Biloxi, June 18th, 57. The Marine in the upper left is Martin Strand. Okay? When you look at all the data about Philippines, it becomes pretty fucking obvious that the Oswald in the course at Biloxi with Martin Strand, that's not the Oswald that showed up in the Philippines where Martin Strand got shot to death. That appears to be the other Oswald. That appears to be Harvey Oswald. Now, who else is out there at that time? Daniel Powers. He's a sergeant at this point, promoted to sergeant. And then he got sent out there. He had been with Oswald allegedly at Atsugi at some point, but then they got separated. He was sent somewhere else. And then he eventually catches up to them in the end of December in the Philippines, right before the Martin Strand incident. So that tells me, if I'm correct, and it was the other Oswald, if it was Harvey Oswald at the Philippines, that's a fucking problem, isn't it? So, here's another thing. Martin Strand, right before all those guys got sent out to El Toro after Biloxi, because the military record, it says some contradictory things. It says in one record that while Oswald is in Biloxi, he's actually at Marine Headquarters Battalion, HQMC, which is Washington, D.C., which is actually Henderson Hall in Alexandria, Virginia, okay? But he's not. He's at Biloxi. Also, when you look at the records of Owen Dejanovic, we'll get to Owen Dejanovic, it says the same thing for him. He's actually at Biloxi, which is on the Marine Diaries, but his actual record says that he's Casual Company, Headquarters Battalion, HQMC, which is up at Arlington, Virginia. So a bunch of these guys are listed as having been in Arlington, Virginia, when they may or may not have been in Arlington, fucking Virginia. Now, all 6 guys who were in that Biloxi school are listed as HQMC Arlington. But the weird thing is the dates. So Martin Strand is actually court-martialed and goes to fucking the brig for a while. I forget what dates he goes to the brig. That's probably pretty important, but it's obviously before the Philippines. But what he gets in trouble for is at Biloxi, he set a mattress on fire. Right? Fucked up, huh? So Martin Strand sets a mattress on fire at Biloxi. Then they have a whole bunch of fucking information that he was like a juvenile delinquent and he got arrested 3 or 4 times when he was a child. And then they kind of gave him the go to the Marines or you're going to go to prison forever speech. And so he goes to the Marines, right? He's kind of a fuck up. And then he ends up in a mix of this stuff. So something's up with Martin Strand. And I can say with pretty much certainty, based on the photograph of Oswald in the Philippines, where he, in his own hand, he wrote 1957, allegedly his own hand. That would line up with the known time that Oswald was in the Philippines. But it's obviously not the Oswald with the fucking bull neck, right? As commented on by John Pick in his Warren Commission testimony. So that's what's going on there. Now, what does that tell me? It tells me that Sergeant Daniel Powers is in on this because he covers for Oswald in the Philippines. Everybody is on leave. If everyone's on leave, which I don't really think they were, because it included dates and travel dates and everything, and they were not charged for their travel. Those 5 guys who were all put on HQMC, they were not charged for their travel. See, if you are on leave and you want to go home, they'll pay for it, but you have to pay them back. It'll come out of your paycheck in the future. So it says not charged, those 5 guys. So what the fuck? How are they going to go on leave and then not be charged for their travel, which was covered by the Marine Corps? That doesn't make any sense. So that tells me that they were not where they say they were. It looks as though if they want to fucking send you somewhere doing something and keep it off the books or keep it hidden somewhere else, then they put you under HQMC in Arlington, Virginia. That seems like a good possibility. That seems like a real good possibility. Now, some additional documents have popped up in reference to the statements made by Alan R. Feld. Okay, so Alan R. Feld is fucked up, and I think that we really can't use Alan Feld's statements as any kind of support of Oswald as having a different schedule, because he's clearly wrong in at least one or two respects. And the fact that he changes his name, the fact that he, according to John Armstrong, he says that Alan R. Feld changed his social security number, but continued to live in the same house and didn't change his name, and then started to deny that he was the Alan R. Feld who was in the Marines with Oswald while living in the same house with the same name with a different social security number, after having worked at Opelika. Give me a fucking break. I mean, this, and on the only confirmation of a Feld in the documents is an Alexander Feld, who was in the same class with Oswald, right? Allegedly Battalion 2060. So the stuff surrounding Feld is crazy. To me, it reeks of the guy came forward and told a story, but then was threatened probably by CIA and changed his story. But there's enough there for me to be like, we can look for other sources. And I found a couple other statements and schedules and documents that will support Oswald having been somewhere else without the need to refer to Feld to do it. So, all right, back to these documents. Next one, dated 11/13/67, from, it looks like FBI, maybe, FBI, to Mr. Trotter from SF Latona, subject assassination of President John Kennedy, November 22nd, 63. A box containing memoranda, worksheets, reports, copies of incoming letters, and negatives of finger and palm prints is in connection with the case, and the case entitled Harvey Lee Oswald, a.k.a. ISR Cuba, BU file 105-82555, is being filed in a bulky file bin in the records division. Recommendation for the record. Next one. Looks like it must be related to CIA because there's a stamp on it. It says CIA has no objection to declassification on this document. It's a House Committee on Assassinations document. Mr. Patrick Carpentier, in connection with its investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy, the Select Committee on Assassination requests that you make available to our staff all files and index references pertaining to the individuals listed below. Lee Harvey Oswald, check also under Lee Henry Oswald, Henry Lee Oswald, and Harvey Lee Oswald. So, again, the point here is just that they knew there was enough indication of a Harvey Lee Oswald for most of these agencies to maintain a separate file. Here's another one, Treasury Department document, January 24th, 64, to Honorable J. Lee Rankin, from James Rowley, Chief U.S. Secret Service, subject Harvey Lee Oswald. And it says, there are forwarded herewith copies of additional reports from the Secret Service files bearing the following Secret Service control numbers. So we've got, 30 30 numbers here, possibly, which are all individual documents referencing the subject Harvey Lee Oswald. All right, request sheet from Blakey, March 9th, 78. 1. A list of documents in the possession of the CIA concerning Lee Harvey Oswald, a.k.a. Harvey Lee Oswald, prior to the opening of the 201 file, as well as the office in which each of those documents was located. This one's rather interesting. This one might have to get me to rethink my understanding of the relationship between the person we know as Oswald or Harvey Oswald and Clay Shaw. Because the thing about Oswald and Clay Shaw is that Miss Moret, Lillian Moret, the aunt, who is the real sister of the real Claverie, right? Marguerite Claverie. She said a man with gray hair came looking for Lee one day. And she identified him as Clay Shaw from a picture. However, that would have been the real Oswald, right? It had to have been no matter what. And that is interesting to me. I don't know how to interpret that. All right, so this is from a Clay Shaw trial. This is an interview. This is part of the questioning of Clay Shaw. He's asked, do you recall giving a press conference on March 2nd, 67, which would have been the day after your arrest, wherein you referred to Lee Harvey Oswald as Harvey Lee Oswald? I recall the press conference, yes. Do you recall having called Lee Harvey Oswald Harvey Lee Oswald? Yes, I think I did make that mistake. Was there any particular reason why you put the name Harvey first? No, purely a mistake. Mr. Shaw, do you know of any of the persons who testified from Clinton, Louisiana? No, I've never met any of them. And then it continues on. This is fascinating to me. Now, like I said before, I don't believe Oswald ever knew any of these fucking guys. And in Clinton, it was clearly Kerry Thornley doing part of the impression, right? So when I hear stuff like this, to me, it seems like more of a name drop setup than anything else. Because it doesn't make any sense for Oswald to be in the mix. You want to keep that guy as far from everything going on as fucking possible. You want him to not have a fucking whiff of anything. And everything you're doing behind his back. That's how you do this. So the idea he's in the mix with any of these fucks is ridiculous. You need a person, Kerry Thornley, to manage him and guide him and plant the seeds and give him the flyers from Jones Printing for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and to pay him $25 a day like Oswald told investigators, I don't think I have that clip for today, but we'll get to that. Oswald told researchers that made it into the Office of Naval Intelligence files he was paid $25 a day to hand those out. Didn't say by who. Next document, December 12th, 1975. Gene Wilson, Freedom of Information Unit, Central Intelligence Agency, Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. Wilson, a recent rereading of much of the literature relating to the murder of President Kennedy indicates that a certain confusion, accidental or otherwise, existed as to the name of the alleged murderer, especially on the part of the agency. References made to him as Lee Harvey Oswald, Harvey Lee Oswald, O.H. Lee, Leon Oswald, Oswald Lee Harvey, and Lee Henry Oswald. Presumably all agency records on Lee Harvey Oswald were made available to the Warren Commission. However, what about records relating to the other four aliases? I would doubt, for example, the Commission has ever asked for all the agency records relating to Lee Henry Oswald. Please consider this as a formal request under the Freedom of Information Act for access to all agency records relating to files under the 5 aliases above of Lee Harvey Oswald. So, again, Harvey Lee Oswald appears to be an intentional filing thing. December 11th, 63, subject, rejection of Soviet citizenship application of Harvey Lee Oswald. Again, remember, the document said Harvey Lee Oswald on the application for Soviet citizenship, or passport, or visa, I should say. So here we have another document, but we'll get to the reference of Harvey Lee Oswald here. But in the corner, you have handwriting indicating this file is related to Harvey Lee Oswald. Ambassador Dobrin called on the secretary at the former's request in order to give the secretary the answer to the secretary's earlier question as to why the Soviet government had refused the application for Soviet citizenship of Harvey Lee Oswald. The ambassador read the following oral statement setting forth the Soviet government's explanation of its refusal of Oswald's application. Quote, the Constitution of the USSR and Soviet legislation provide that Soviet citizens have certain rights and appropriate responsibilities. Considering an application for Soviet citizenship, the competent authorities of the Soviet Union take into account first of all the ability of the applicant to carry out responsibilities of a citizen of the USSR and to make the use of the rights granted to him. Due regard is paid also to the motivations of one's application for admission to the Soviet citizenship. The competent Soviet authorities that considered Oswald's application did not find convincing grounds which would allow him to draw a conclusion that he complied with the requirements provided for Soviet citizens in the constitutional and legislation of the USSR. And here's another thing. The vast majority of these references to Harvey Lee Oswald do completely coincide with Armstrong's Harvey Oswald, the Oswald that we have come to know. This here that I'm going to get to is fascinating to me because it helps me almost narrow down maybe some of the programs that Oswald had been involved with. November 25th, 63. It looks like an FBI document. So, to Mr. Walter P. Haltigan, maybe it's a CIA document, probably a CIA document. It doesn't indicate here. It came from the documents of the Office of Naval Intelligence, but the Office of Naval Intelligence documents, a lot of them were compilations of documents from other sources, so it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. To Walter P. Haltigan, one, it makes little difference now, but Redwood had at one time an operational interest in Oswald. So Redwood, I haven't looked into it yet, but Redwood is probably a program under Red Skin. As soon as I had heard Oswald's name, I recalled that as chief of the 6th branch, I had discussed sometime in summer 1960 with the then chief and deputy chief of the 6th Research Station the laying on of interviews through KU Jump, or other suitable channels. At the moment, I don't recall if this was discussed while Oswald and his family were en route to our country, or if it was after their arrival. 2, I remember that Oswald's unusual behavior in the USSR had struck me from the moment I had read the first OD acid dispatch on him and told my subordinates something amounting to don't push too hard to get the information we need because this individual looks odd. We were particularly interested in the OI, that's operational interest, Oswald might provide, or operational intelligence Oswald might provide on the Minsk factory in which he had been employed on certain sections of the city itself. And of course, we sought the usual BI that might help develop target personality dossiers. 3, I was phasing into my it looks like LP, and then something's redacted, and then cover assignment, and out of KU Dove at the time. This I would have left our country shortly after Oswald's arc. I do not know what action developed thereafter. That's from Thomas B. Casasin, Casasin. Addendum. 4, as an afterthought, I recall that at this time, I was becoming increasingly interested in watching develop a pattern that we had discovered in the course of our bio and research in 6, the number of Soviet women marrying foreigners, being permitted to leave the USSR and then eventually divorcing their spouses and settling down abroad without returning, quote, home. And this is where it gets good. The A.E. Ocean 3 case was among the first of these. A.E. Ocean. Couldn't fall under A.E. Balcony, could it? And we eventually turned up something like 24 similar cases. We established links between some of these women in the KGB. KU desk became interested in the KU desk is Cuba, I think. Became interested in the developing trend we'd come across. It was partly out of curiosity to learn if Oswald's wife would actually accompany him to our country, partly out of interest in Oswald's own experience in the USSR, that we showed operational intelligence interest in the Harvey story. We showed operational intelligence interest in the Harvey story. Thomas B. Casasin. That speaks for itself. Next document, FBI, looks like. Number one, it says no, and there's a long space, probably a redaction, and traces Oswald. Checked all available sources, including landing card and hotel registers, without result. Source reported Soviets greatly shocked by news and immediately blamed assassination on extreme right-wing elements. No significant info, any other ops. Comment, requested traces Harvey Lee Oswald. This is document number 151-60 for FOIA review, April 76. What was the original date? November 27, 63. This is an interesting one. I don't know how much I believe it, because it seems to be a combination of, it seems to be an intersection of stories involving Robert Tabor, founder of Fair Play for Cuba Committee, being in Cuba itself and introducing a Lieutenant Harvey Oswald, an arms expert, to a third party, Enrique Lorenzo Luacas y Villaseca. Allegedly Robert Tabor brings Lieutenant Harvey Oswald, an arms expert, to meet with Luacas, Luaces. I don't know how to pronounce that. I see documents like this, and they just scream to me of a false story. See, Tabor was busy down there in Cuba with Castro before the revolution in the 50s. One of the few people to be granted access to Castro, which indicates clearly he was CIA. And then he forms Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Give me a fucking break. This guy's an operative. So, yeah, I see stuff like this. I don't know. We'll just leave it as is. Then we have, I already read you the paragraph from Peter Dale Scott's book, but I think it's really important to just reiterate this last paragraph here. In addition, at least one of these G2 records listed Oswald by a slightly different name. This alternative name, which eventually was used by at least 4 different military intelligence sources, was Harvey Lee Oswald. This Harvey Lee Oswald reference is no accidental anomaly, but part of an organized pattern widely dispersed that suggests an official intelligence deception and possible dual filing system. Serial number 02296-E of 27 June 60 is the earliest Harvey Lee Oswald reference we now possess of over 24 from the files of ONI, FBI, CIA, Army Intelligence, the Secret Service, the Mexican Secret Police, and the Dallas Police. A consistent pattern of behavior in these agencies since the assassination has been the tendency to suppress references to Harvey Lee Oswald and replace them by the more standard Lee Harvey Oswald. I think that this is all falling into place. I think now we can pretty much say with absolute certainty that there were 2 Oswalds. Now, let me just say this. What if there was a possibility that there was a third Oswald? A third Oswald with a mother named Margaret Oswald. What if? Let's just stew on that for a minute. What if there was another Oswald somewhere with a mother named Margaret Mary Oswald, who was connected to Ehrlicher, the head of the Civil Air Patrol? It's a good possibility, and we'll have to cross that bridge another time. So now what I want to do is I stumbled in the ONI documents. I stumbled across the interviews of Oswald's cousins and aunts and uncles on the father's side, which I never knew existed. They're not, you can't find them. The FBI talked to these people, but they're in there. I guess they're commissions exhibits, but no one's ever really talked about these. I couldn't find them anywhere. I've never seen them before. Some of the things that they say in here, you have to read twice to kind of make sure you got it right. So before we get started, you have to know that Harvey Flo Oswald, or Floy Oswald, was Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle. It was Robert Edward Lee Oswald Sr.'s brother. So, despite being named Robert, everyone just called Robert Edward Lee Oswald Sr. They called him Lee. That was what they called him his whole life. He was always Lee Oswald. You'll see the name Lee Oswald printed a half a dozen times, and you have to do a double take because you'll realize that it's the father, not Lee Harvey Oswald. So, that being said, I have a document here, 11/25/63, interview William Stout Oswald, Jr., 136 Ellicourt Street, Metairie, Louisiana. Advised he is the son of William Stout Oswald Sr. and Hazel Oswald, and the first cousin of Lee Harvey Oswald. Mr. Oswald stated the last he had seen or heard of Lee Oswald was when Lee was in New Orleans with Mother Marguerite when Lee was about 14. He did not know how long Lee had stayed in New Orleans. He could provide no further personal information concerning Lee's activities since the time. Oswald said the name Heidel didn't mean anything to him. That's from the FBI. Okay, now we're gonna now we have the Office of Naval Intelligence version. All right, this is who this is. Same guy, different statement. All right. On the morning of 11/23/63, contacted William Stout Oswald, or perhaps this is the FBI document before it was edited and given to everyone else. Perhaps this is an unedited version. So, on the morning of 11/23/63, contacted William Stout Oswald, 705 Division Street. Hang on a second. So, both of these are dated 11/23, which would indicate it's the same interview. But the top one says William Stout Oswald Jr., 136 Ellicourt Street, Metairie, Louisiana. This one says contacted on the morning of 11/23, contacted William Stout Oswald, 705 Division Street, Metairie, by phone and requested he call the office for interview. He was interviewed later the same date at the office. He's a white male, 27, date of birth 11/6/35, 5'7", 153, rust-colored hair. Single, a college graduate. He's employed as a teacher at the Metairie High School. All right, period. Let me stop right there for a second. Isn't this the same William Stout Oswald Jr.? It doesn't have a date here. It doesn't have his birthday and stuff here, but how the fuck many William Stout Oswald Jr.'s could there be? I did see a reference to a William Stout Oswald III. This could perhaps be him. I'll have to clarify that for you guys for next time. I apologize. All right, next sentence. He stated that although Harvey Lee Oswald is said to be his second cousin, he had never met him or had even known that Harvey was also employed by the William B. Riley Coffee Company during part of the same time that he was employed there. He explained that the Standard Coffee Company was a branch of the Riley Company, and that the Standard Coffee Company was the sales branch of the Riley Coffee Company. He said that he had been employed as a route salesman for the company and never had any reason to go to the main office, William B. Riley. So, William Stout Oswald, who lives at 705 Division Street in Metairie, worked for the same coffee company that Harvey, he calls him Harvey here twice, and nobody corrects him. Harvey Lee Oswald is said to be his second cousin. He'd never met him, nor had he known that Harvey... Oh, yeah, this is William Stout III, because he's the son of... He has to be the son of William Stout Jr. William Stout Oswald Jr. Okay, because he's... he just said that here. He'd never met... Or he's his second cousin, because William Stout Oswald Jr. is the first cousin. Gotcha. He had never met him, nor had he known that Harvey was also employed by the William B. Riley Coffee Company. Yeah, a coincidence? Remember, there's no fucking coincidences. He's not the only other Oswald that worked there coming up, but there was a Jules J. Oswald who worked there also. Weird, huh? Following relatives of Lee Harvey Oswald are currently residing in New Orleans, and they've never met Lee Harvey Oswald, have no information concerning him. Aunts, Mrs. James Coker, nee Hattie Oswald, Mrs. Arthur A.P. Barre, B-A-R-R-E, nee Alice Oswald, Mrs. Edmund C. Carter, nee Ethel Oswald, aunt by marriage, widow of Thomas Oswald, Mrs. Adele F. Oswald, cousins, and Hazel Oswald also was married to Thomas. Cousins, Mrs. William Brown, nee Floyd Oswald, Mrs. Wait a minute. Hang on a second. We might have a redaction here. Mrs. William Brown Nee Floy Oswald, and then it says Mrs., and then there is a redaction. Daughters of Harvey Oswald, right? So Harvey Oswald being Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle, brother of Robert Lee Oswald. So there's nothing there. Mrs. redacted. Why is that fucking redacted? And then the next sentence is Tony Bevinetto Nee Shirley Oswald, Miss Adele Oswald, daughter of Thomas Oswald. Uncles Thomas, William, and Harvey Oswald are deceased. What the fuck? Is there a redaction there? All right. Moving on. Next, we have the statements of Edmund C. Carter, Ethel Oswald, Adele Oswald, Mrs. William Brown, Floy Oswald. All these people, they didn't have anything to do with Oswald after Robert Lee Oswald died. He died, and they fucking became, second-class citizens. Marguerite Oswald didn't reach out to any of them at any time. Kind of weird, huh? The family's there. They're resources. It's a support system, right? Why not take advantage of it? Crying poor her whole goddamn life, and they got a whole family's worth of resources there. What the fuck? Something's up here. Something is majorly up here. All right. Then we move on to the statement of Mrs. Moret. So we have a lot of information in regards to Mrs. Moret, Lillian Moret, the sister of Marguerite Oswald, who allegedly was heavily involved with Lee Harvey Oswald, raising him as a child and all this stuff. But she basically indicates here in her statements to the FBI Commission Exhibit 1920, that she never really heard from Oswald until he had moved to New Orleans and tried to get a job, and he stayed there for a couple days. And she hadn't heard from him in years before that. But I think that is very contradictory to the record that we've kind of been led to believe. I'll have to do some clarification on that, but it's ringing major bells when I read the statement and she says that. Let me read you these statements from William Stout Oswald Jr. I don't know if I already talked about him, but it just hits me as he's the son of William Stout Oswald Sr. and Hazel Oswald, first cousin of Lee Harvey Oswald. Mr. Oswald stated he'd not heard of Lee Harvey Oswald for a while. I can't read that. Who Lee was in New Orleans with his mother Marguerite when Lee was about 14. He hadn't seen him since he was 14. He didn't know how long Lee stayed in New Orleans, but he could provide no further information. So yeah, it's unusual, When he was 14, that would have been about the time when 39, 49, 53, that would have been about the time that they were coming back from New York. Just like lines up with the statements of Hazel Oswald. Lowell Oswald is another Oswald, who is the son of Hazel Oswald and Harvey Oswald. He said he don't know nothing about Lee Oswald. Never seen him, doesn't know him. Leave me alone, basically. This gets interesting because now we have a statement, the FBI statement of Hazel Oswald, and it appears to leave a lot out. It's very vanilla. Miss Hazel Oswald, 136 Elmore Street, Metairie, Louisiana, advised she's the widow of William Stout Oswald. She stated her husband's brother, Lee Oswald Sr., and wife, Marguerite Nee Claverie, had been residing in New Orleans in the 1930s. Lee Sr. died in 1939, and approximately 2 months after his death, a son, Lee Harvey Oswald, was born. When Lee was approximately 2.5 years of age, Marguerite left New Orleans, going to Fort Worth, Texas, upon where she continued to raise Lee and an older brother, Robert Oswald, and another boy, a son by a previous marriage whose name was not known to her. Miss Oswald stated she lost all track of Marguerite and Lee until one day received a telephone call from Marguerite. During the conversation, Marguerite indicated Lee was then 14 years of age, and she was living in the city of New Orleans with him, employed at the Burt Shoe Store on Canal Street. According to Mrs. Oswald, sometime after this call, she went by this store and talked with Marguerite for a short time. After that, she lost all contact with Marguerite, and apparently Marguerite and Lee left New Orleans, date unknown, She stated she did not know for how long Marguerite actually resided in New Orleans. Mrs. Oswald, meaning Hazel Oswald, stated the next time she heard from either Marguerite or Lee was in a day about April of 1963, when Lee telephoned her and said that he was in New Orleans and he wanted to visit and obtain some information about his father's relatives, specifically a Harvey Oswald, the grandfather, then deceased. So allegedly, Lee Oswald here calls Hazel Oswald and asks for information about Harvey Oswald. Now, she never says if he specifies whether he's talking about his father's brother or another Harvey Oswald. However, we might have another document that might clarify some stuff. During her conversation with Lee, he said he left his wife and child in Texas until he could find some employment in New Orleans, and that he wanted to find employment as a photographer. He did not specifically say where he was living, but she received the impression that one of his mother's sisters was in New Orleans, address unknown, and that Lee was living with her. Mrs. Oswald stated sometime prior to Lee's visit, she had read in the newspapers that Lee had been in Russia and had indicated a desire to become a Russian citizen. During the conversation, they were talking about Lee's wife, and Lee exhibited her photograph. Mrs. Oswald asked him if his wife were Russian, and Lee replied, why do you ask that? She said that other than this one exchange, nil of her conversations was about relatives. She stated she did not hear from nor see Lee thereafter and has no knowledge as to his personal contact with any of the other relatives in the Oswald family. She has no knowledge as to his activities. She had a son, Norman Oswald, who lives at 703 Division Street, Metairie. And he has a son, William Stout Oswald III, who's a school teacher in Metairie. He clarifies that. And son's responsible position is one of the in military reserve units. William Stout III, who is a school teacher in Metairie and has sons, responsible position in one of the military reserve units. William Oswald III had talked to Mrs. Oswald on the morning of November 23rd, 63, indicating someone had questioned him about Lee Oswald, and he indicated that he knew nothing whatsoever. She said she does not know what school or organizations Lee might have been associated with while he resided in New Orleans, and that the name Heidel meant nothing to him or to her, and she was positive it was not an Oswald family name. She never heard Lee use the name. In conclusion, Mrs. Oswald advised that after the death of Lee's father, the mother severed relations with the Oswald family. After moving to Texas, did not maintain any association with any member of the family and could not furnish any further details concerning the background. Okay, so we'll get to it, but I got another document we're going to get to that is totally different from that one, with an interview with the same person. On 11/23/63, contacted Jules J. Oswald by telephone. He said he was not related to Lee Harvey Oswald, as far as he knew. He said he never had met him, nor had he known Oswald was employed by the William B. Riley Coffee Company. Mr. Oswald, I can't read that word, something, returned to New Orleans from New York on Saturday morning, 11/23/63, by Delta Airlines Flight Number 9. He also stated he was not related to, nor did he know, William Stout Oswald. On 11/22/63, by telephone, contacted Hazel Oswald, 136 Elmer Place, Metairie. She stated William Stout Oswald, now deceased, formerly lived at 136 Elmer Place and had 4 sons named as follows. William, looks like E. Oswald, or S. Oswald. Lee Oswald, which is Robert Lee Oswald, but they kept referring to him as Lee Oswald. Harvey Oswald and Thomas Oswald. Mrs. Oswald said she was married to William Oswald and was his second wife. Oh, she was married to William Oswald. His previous wife had 2 sons, Norman, who lives at 706 Division, and William S. Oswald Jr., who lives at 136 Elmer in Metairie. She said that this William S. Oswald is partially paralyzed and has never been in the military service. She said that she has last seen Lee Harvey Oswald in May 1963. She related that she had received a phone call from him, and he asked her how he could contact Harvey Oswald. She said he did not know that his uncles, William S., Harvey Oswald, and Thomas Oswald, had passed away. she said he finally asked her who she was, and she told him she was the second wife of his uncle, William S. Oswald. She told Harvey, here we go. She told Harvey that she had a large framed picture of his father. So she's referring to him as Harvey in this paragraph here. She told Harvey, and nobody corrected her on it, that she had a large framed picture of his father and that he could have the picture if he wanted it. She said the same day he came to the house and got the picture, and he stayed about 45 minutes. Where's this picture? It wasn't in his possessions when the FBI busted him. She said, or the Dallas police, she said he was alone at the time and told her his wife was in Texas and he'd come to New Orleans to look for work. So this is Harvey Oswald for sure, and she called him Harvey. She said he mentioned that he was a photographer or was interested in getting a job in the photography field. He also mentioned that he was staying with an aunt, his mother's sister, name aunt not recalled. That's Miss Moret, Lillian. Continuing on, at 1 a.m. on 11/23, let me see if I can skip some of this because some of this doesn't have to do with her. Let me see, picking up here. He had interviewed Oswald either on Saturday morning or Sunday morning with reference to Oswald's arrest on 8/9/63. Oswald had furnished his birth date as 10/18/38. I don't know if that's a typo or intentional. Said he had served 3 years in the U.S. Marine Corps and claimed he received an honorable discharge on 9/17/59. It was 9/11/59, actually, at the Marine Air Station El Toro, Santa Ana, California. Oswald had stated he was married to the former Marina Prosa, but later said his wife's name was Marina Prosakaya, and that she was an alien M1. He stated he and his wife had one child, June Lee Oswald, 17 months of age, and they had been living at 4907 Magazine Street, New Orleans, for about 4 months. So talking about the arrest 8/9/63. Prior to coming to New Orleans, Oswald claimed he lived at 4709 Mercedes in Fort Worth. Oswald claimed his mother's name was Margaret Oswald. Margaret, not Marguerite, Margaret. Remember, look how much he's getting wrong here. Margaret Oswald, address not known, and that his father, Robert Lee Oswald, deceased. He said he had two brothers, Robert Oswald, who lived in Fort Worth, and John Oswald, who lived in Arlington, Texas. He doesn't have a brother, John Oswald, because John had no relation to Oswald. It was a pick. Oswald claimed he'd attended Beauregard School, New Orleans, Warren Easton High School, New Orleans, and grammar school. That's the Regalia West. Is that what it is? Riegiala. That's the one that was controversial, that Robert Oswald said he actually went to Stripling instead, right? He mentioned his social security number as 433-543937 and his selective service number, and he gives a selective service number. Oswald claimed he had become interested in Fair Play for Cuba organization in Los Angeles, California during 1958 while he was in the U.S. Marine Corps. In addition, Oswald claimed there were 35 members of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee organization in New Orleans at the time, but declined to furnish any nuance or any names. That's false. And he was only in fucking Santa Ana or El Toro during 1958 for about fucking a week. December 22nd, he arrives there. Mr. Montello, this is a cop, I think, said at the time of Oswald's arrest he had various pamphlets in his possession, and those had been kept by Lieutenant Martello. He said he would turn them over to this office if we so desired. He stated that before being transferred to the 1st District, he'd been assigned to the Intelligence Division, NOPD, for about 2 years, and that during this time he became familiar with various communist front organizations. He said that an address in the 1100 block of Pine Street, New Orleans, seemed to be the center of activity in New Orleans for various communistic front organizations. And he said that Dr. Reisman, Reissman, professor, Tulane University, lived at the Pine Street address where numerous meetings were held. He said that he had learned from one of his... and that's all where I clipped it because we got to the relevant part there, that the inconsistencies in the information provided by Harvey Oswald. Mrs. Oswald, this is where we're going to pick up. Mrs. Oswald, we're talking about Hazel Oswald again. Mrs. Oswald said she had received a phone call from Lee Harvey's mother, Margarita, particularly with an A at the end, when Lee was 14 years of age, and that Margarita was seeking information concerning obtaining assistance from the VA for Lee Harvey. As she recalled, Margarita and Lee Harvey had come to New Orleans from New York, and Mrs. Oswald subsequently went to work at Burt's shoe store in New Orleans, probably as a sales lady. Mrs. Oswald said she knew that Lee Harvey had defected to Russia and subsequently returned to the United States, but she did not mention this to him for the reason that she did not want to embarrass him. She described him as a peculiar sort of person, and she said that she never saw him after this one occasion. This is the time that he went to the house in May, right? Let me see. Moving on. We've already talked about William Stout Oswald. On his application form, William had given the name of the following persons as references. He said he had been recommended for employment by the company by Henry Davis, who was still employed there. He's talking about where his work is at the Riley Coffee Company. And he gives the names Henry Davis, Eugene Dolan, and Jacob. I can't read that last name. And Henry Davis, as accompanied William to the office, he was interviewed 11/23/63, and he did not know Harvey Lee Oswald. So here again, we have a reference to the Harvey Lee Oswald. This is from the Office of Naval Intelligence files. And even though both were employed by the same company, he was unable to furnish any information of value. So he had 3 Oswalds all employed at William B. Riley at the same time. Davis is a white male, 23, 5'7", 150, ruddy complexion, dark hair, said to have been employed by Standard Coffee Company for the past 5 years. Remember, the guy who owned Standard Company and Riley Coffee was ex-CIA. On 11/23/63, he received a phone call from Lieutenant Martello, New Orleans Police Department. He said he could not remember the name of Oswald's aunt who visited Oswald at the 1st District New Orleans Police Department, but he did remember that he had to furnish the woman's name to the FBI, also that he'd been interviewed by the FBI on or about 8/9/63, and that Time had given the agents some of the literature had been seized from the Oswalds, as well as cardboard signs Oswald had been carrying at the time of his arrest. Okay, this is a really fascinating paragraph. This is Hazel Oswald telling investigators, I believe at the FBI, because this is in the Naval Intelligence files, it says, later during the day, a telephone call was received from Mrs. Hazel Oswald, who said that Oswald's mother's maiden name was Claverie, that she did not know the name of Mrs. Oswald's first husband, and that her second husband was Lee's father. She said that Lee's father died in August of 1939, and Lee was born in October 1939. After the death of the father, the family moved to New York, and when Lee and his mother returned to New Orleans a number of years later, about 14, Lee's mother contacted Hazel and said they had returned to New Orleans because Lee did not like New York. So according to Hazel Oswald, after Robert Oswald died, the family moved to New York for 14 years. I need to find some kind of substantiation for this because this would be fascinating. Fascinating. And this could clarify a gap between 39 and 47 of what happened to one of the Oswalds, right? Right? All right. Moving on. She said as far as she knew, Lee's mother was supposed to be living in Arlington, Texas, a suburb of Fort Worth, and she allegedly employed as a practical nurse. See, I don't know if the practical nurse thing, that's the Margaret Oswald imposter. But this one's just only hearing about it, and she wasn't related to her in the first place. She said that Lee's mother had several sisters living in New Orleans, but she did not know the names of any of the sisters. On 11/23/63, a long-distance call was received from S.A. Stewart Dallas, and he advised that Oswald was related to the following named persons in New Orleans: Marilyn Moret, Jean Moret, Charles Moret, and I can't read Bogey Moret. I can't read this one. And it says professional baseball player. One of them is a Jesuit priest. Mr. Stewart requested that the above-named people be interviewed if they could be located. He was informed that this family apparently lived at 757 French Street, New Orleans, that this was known for the reason Lee Harvey Oswald had furnished for reference purposes the name John Moret, 757 French Street. On 11/23/63, he called at the above address and interviewed Mr. Charles Dutz Moret. His wife and their daughter, Marilyn, Mrs. Moret, said she was the sister of Lee Harvey Oswald's mother. She said in addition to Marilyn, she had a son, Jean Moret, graduate of Loyola University, New Orleans, who is now studying for the priesthood at a seminary in Mobile, Alabama. a son, John Moret, an ex-professional baseball player, now married, living at 6622 Louis XIV Street in New Orleans, and Dr. Charles Moret, a dentist who practiced in St. Bernard Parish. I thought Charles Dutz Moret worked for the mob. And that's the end of the statements that I clipped in relation to the interviews with the Oswald family. Why would Marguerite suddenly cut off contact with all of them? Why was there no contact there at all? Or on the other side, the Claverie family. I'll have to get to those statements too, but it doesn't seem like there was any contact there either. But damn, long show today, but we're going to wrap it up here, and I'll be back tomorrow. Tune in later. I'm going to have an episode of Blood History World War II. So talk to you guys tomorrow.